Most quilt blocks are based on simple geometric shapes, squares, rectangles, equilateral triangles, but some blocks just really need a weirdly angled or weirdly sized piece that is difficult to cut with regular rulers. Now, sometimes specialty rulers can be the perfect answer, but if you are cutting fabric just for one block or one small quilt, then investing in a specialty ruler that you may never use again is maybe not the right answer for you. So today I'm going to show you how to take the paper templates from the pattern and combine them with rulers you already own to make your own specialty rulers. The block we're going to be working on today is the Maltese Cross block. It's a fairly simple block, but it does require 2 different templates. The instructions include 3 different sizes. The layer cake finishes at 8 inches. We're going to be making the 12-inch finished block today, and there's also a large 16-inch fat quarter size. The first page is the instructions, and then the following pages are all of the different templates you will need for the various sizes. When you print your pattern, be sure that you are printing your pattern at no scaling or 100% scaling, whatever the language in your little print box says. And to check, there's always a 1-inch square on my patterns that you can put a ruler on to make sure that it's printing exactly at the right size. We need to cut out our template pieces. You can use paper scissors, good old paper scissors, or I like to keep an old rotary blade that has lived its life cutting fabric, and I retire it to this cutter, which is marked on the back side so that I know that this is my paper blade. I have my cut template here, and if you've ever used a paper template, you've probably done it one of 2 ways. You've either put your template on a piece of fabric and drawn around it, and then either cut on those lines with acrylic and a rotary cutter, or just use some scissors. Or you have put your template down on your fabric and then aligned your ruler on top of it and used your rotary cutter alongside the edge of the line. The problem with that is that you may slowly be cutting your paper template as you make your cuts, and this template may end up smaller as you progress through cutting an entire quilt, which can be problematic when you go to assemble your block. So we're going to get around that by taping our template to our ruler so that we don't have to align the paper and the ruler, except for that first time when we tape it. If you think about how you're going to use this template, you need to decide which edge or edges you need to cut against. I'm probably going to cut a strip of fabric the width of this template and then cut my triangles back and forth since they will nest. So I don't need this edge to cut against, but I do need these 2 edges. So I'm going to tape my template right up against this edge. You can do it on top, or you can tape your template to the underside, whichever makes sense to you. I'm going to just do it right on top here. I'm going to use double-sided tape because it's magic and I love this stuff. I'm going to put it there, and then I'm just going to align the edge of my template with my ruler, and I'm just using my fingers here to get a nice alignment, and then smooth it down. Now when I'm cutting my fabric, I can cut this edge, and then since this is a mirrored triangle, I can either flip it over to cut the other edge, or you can be extra sneaky and just cut another template out and tape it to the other side so that you have access to both sides that you're going to be cutting up against. So I'm ready to cut. I'm using the templates just to get a vague idea of the strip width that I need to cut for my fabric. And that will allow me to use my templates in a more organized way. So I cut my strip, and now it is just a matter of lining up the bottom of the template, that straight edge, and cutting off the excess. So I line it up here and I cut that angle, and then I can rotate my ruler and line up the edge of the fabric with the paper and cut really easily. It's just turning my ruler around, lining it up, and making the cut, and I can just move this down the strip working this way until I have all 4 of my pieces. The other template works the same way. Here I am lining up that corner of the template with the nice right angle of my piece of fabric, and then I can easily cut the other angle. Now, as I was working with this, I realized it would be much easier to have a third template so that I had that nice right angle to cut and that I could line it up with the rest of the piece. So I quickly grabbed another template and stuck it to my ruler, and then I was able to finish up the cutting, just rotating my ruler to the side I needed to cut and cutting the fabric. For both of these templates, I've used large square rulers, but any ruler you have that the templates will fit on will work. I have cut out 4 each of my template A and template B pieces, and we are ready to assemble this block. This block goes together a little bit like a wonky 4-patch because we are going to create quadrants by sewing together each of these pieces. So I'm going to grab my top 2 and put them right sides together. Now, if you have ever sewn together a triangle based pattern that has a phrase something like offset your pieces 1/4 inch so they go together smoothly, something like that. That's true, but it is a little bit misleading because the offset that you need to make is dependent entirely on the angle of the pieces that you're working with. Really skinny tips, like small, shallow angles, need to be offset more than a 45-degree angle, like on a right square, on a half square triangle. So these angles that we're working with are on the narrow side. I would guess this is something like a 30-degree angle on this triangle. So our offset isn't going to be exactly 1/4 inch. You can eyeball it, you can lay this down, and what we're looking for in our alignment is these 2 crevices, this valley here and this shallower valley here, to be 1/4 inch in from the edge. If you do not want to eyeball it, or if you're like me and I just want to mark those first couple until I get a sense of where that 1/4 inch feels, then it's my dog. So what I do is I take a regular cutting ruler that has 1/4 inch line on it, and I lay it down on the edge of the fabric, the edge that will be sewn to this green piece. On the wrong side, I am going to mark a sewing line that is 1/4 inch in from the edge. So now when we put these right side together, we are looking for that line to point right into the valley of these 2 joins, these 2 pieces coming together. It's a little bit clearer on this one since the angles are a little steeper, but you want this line to dead end right as those pieces come together. So I'm going to sew these together and show you why that line is important. So I have sewn on that line, which definitely erased because it was one of those heat pens, but I have pressed it open, and you can see now that we have this edge of our block is nice and flat. If we had not offset these correctly, let's say we just aligned the edge point to point and sewed these together. So I have sewn our not offset piece, and you can see that there's several stitches of my seam showing on the green fabric. And when we press this open, we're going to see that we are losing almost 1/4 inch. This white piece is inside the block too far. So we don't have that nice straight line emerging for the edge of the block like we do here. So take a moment to draw that 1/4 inch line inside of your piece and sew on it, making sure that it extends into that little valley where your pieces are offset. And then you don't have to worry about offsetting it 1/4 inch versus 1/3 inch. You just move it to where that line is. And then sew, open it up, and it'll be nice and flat. I'm going to fix this one, and then I'm going to sew my final 2 pairs together, and then we'll get this block together. All my pairs are sewn, so I am going to rotate them around and lay out my block. And you're just making sure that you're alternating green and white so that the seam colors aren't touching. If you have green to green, then something's going on. Now it looks a little bit more like a 4-patch. We have our top half of our block and our bottom half of our block. The angles are a little weird, but they're all 90 degrees from each other. So I'm going to assemble this just like I would a 9-patch. I'm going to sew my 2 halves together, and then I will sew this long seam. And if you want to take a moment to cut these little hangy bits, these little dog ears off, then it will make this center of your block come together a little bit more smoothly. And now we have our final seam. And here we're just looking to match up all of these points so they come together in a nice crisp center. As I'm sewing here, I'm keeping an eye on that center where all those pieces of fabric come together. And I am going to deviate my seam allowance if I need to make sure my needle comes down right next to that point. Then I just press everything open and we're done. And there is our finished 12-inch block. This block came out really nicely. There is a little bit of bulk in the center because there are 8 pieces of fabric all coming together at this point. So to prevent a lot of bulk there, you can press your seams open. You can use some spray as you press all of these pieces together to keep them nice and flat so they don't fold over when you're sewing across them and create even more bulk. I spray with Best Press or starch just to get a little bit more flatness and secure those seam allowances so they don't move around on me. I have pressed my seam allowances open in this 12-inch block, and I did the same in this large fat quarter block that is 16 inches. It also has a fairly nice flat center. When I made this small layer cake version, I pressed most of my pieces to the side. This one's a little wobbly, but I pressed that last seam open because I didn't want all of that bulk to be on one side of the seam. So this did distribute it a little bit, and it is still pretty darn flat. So I think just taking some care and pressing really nicely between each stage will help keep your block nice and flat. I hope you guys enjoyed this little travel from paper template to finished block. If you would like to learn more quilting techniques, I do have a playlist popping up on the screen that is more technique-based videos like this. And there's also the Block Study playlist if you just want to make some nice blocks. Until we meet again, happy quilting!